Well, there's a during season and an off season component. So let's start with during the season because that's the easiest to understand. I'm in charge of all forecasting and information pertaining to storm surge, which comes out of the National Hurricane Center. And then it flows through the National Weather Service and goes out to emergency managers and decision makers and public and the media. So it's essentially the tip of the spear with respect to storm surge information. So that's sort of the during a hurricane landfall mission. What many people don't understand is our off-season mission is just as important. We do all of the modeling that goes into developing the nation's evacuation zones. So hurricane evacuation zones in this nation are based off storm surge, not wind. So we do all of the modeling at the Hurricane Center that goes into determining how far inland the zones go and how many zones are necessary. The biggest misconception is people think that storm surge is just a problem at the coast, meaning if you can take a resident that can see the ocean from their house, you can usually convince them that they might have a flood problem. But if they cannot see the ocean, so we're talking like if you go just a few blocks inland and they can't see the ocean, they seem to think that storm surge is not a problem. We've seen from historical storms, recent ones, that storm surge can go dozens of miles inland. And always after these events, you interview people and they say, never knew it could come this far inland. We experience wind every day, but how often does an individual experience saltwater flooding? It's usually relatively a rare event, and so that means it's very hard for the average person to visualize it. And what studies have shown is if people can't visualize the hazard, if they can't visualize the threat, they're less likely to think it impacts them. Not necessarily. The water doesn't know anything about tropical, post-tropical, extratropical. It merely knows how hard the wind is pushing on it. Okay. That's all the water knows, and it responds to that. So we have different types of models for different type of situations. So all that meant was we went to a different modeling system to better reflect the large wind field. When Sandy was undergoing the change, it was becoming larger, which means we had to use a different modeling system to capture the growth and size of the wind field. So you can make your own storm surge at home for the purposes of just convincing yourself. So in your pool, especially when it gets warmer, you can take your arm and just go over the surface of the pool, and you will create water moving in a direction. It's no different with wind. Wind is essentially the same thing.
That's the catalyst.
Right, the catalyst, the force. The interesting thing about this analogy is it helps to demonstrate how the size of a hurricane contributes to storm surge. So if you take your finger and run it through the water, you don't move much water. You take your arm and move it through, you move a lot of water. And Sandy's large size and Isaac's large size are what caused them to be such huge storm surge events. It's an area that hasn't been impacted in a long time, but it's still very vulnerable, getting hit. And the best case of that is the west coast of Florida. Everyone's going to think about Tampa when I say that, but it's the entire west coast of Florida that is incredibly vulnerable to storm surge. And they've been very fortunate in that they haven't had the big one for a long time. That's allowed a lot of growth at the coastline and influx of people who've never experienced a hurricane. And so my fear is you're going to have a catastrophic storm surge somewhere along the west coast of Florida, and you have a populace that's just not ready for it.